The door closed and the room changed. Outside, it was a corridor of pale stone, where Celine Var moved through her afternoons the way water moves through a channel, always shaped by it. The corridor had been rebuilt 2 years ago under the new austerity program that spared nothing except people, and it showed its budget in every detail. Stone cut to a width no shoulder had ever needed, a ceiling high. Enough to make the women who crossed it feel smaller than their posts. Protocol officers flanked her in a silence that had its own choreography, and she let them take her through the day's appointments the way a current takes a leaf. She had learned, Mara thought sometimes, to be that kind of thing, carried rather than walking. Inside the fitting room, there were only mirrors and fabric, no camera, no lens, waiting in the doorway like a second pair of eyes. Lenses had been forbidden from this room by an order so old, Mara could not remember who had signed it, only that it was obeyed. Just the mirrors, bolts of cloth on their rails like shutters over a windowless house. And the measuring tape in her hand. Mara had worked for Celine for 10 years, and in that time she had come to believe the fitting room was a country of its own. Outside, Celine's body belonged to the state. It stood in ceremonial lines, it smiled at angles calculated by communication staff and recalibrated between them. It performed its choreographed intimacy with the president, at a distance that had been measured and approved. Inside this room it was allowed, for one afternoon at a time, to be private, flesh instead of an asset. Mara guarded that privacy, the way a customs officer guards a border, because she knew what lay on both sides of it. The Republic had given her that room as a concession, or so the papers called it, a private fitting suite for the First Lady within the presidential complex, an acknowledgement that state garments required state discretion. What the papers did not say was what the room actually contained, because no one had thought to describe it in words. 10 years of paper patterns filed by season and occasion, a cabinet of measurements rewritten so often. The earliest sheets had gone soft at their edges, and one mirror large enough to hold a woman whole, more than the Republic generally permitted any of its women. Celine stood in the center of the room facing the long mirror, wearing a grey dress that hung from her shoulders like something borrowed. The dress was last season's, cut for a body she'd apparently outgrown in the small places that did not show from a stage. She did not turn around when the door closed. "Madam," Mara said, and the word came out of her mouth with the same flat courtesy it always did. 10 years had worn that greeting down to a single smooth stone, and she no longer felt it land. "Call me Celine," she said, and even in the mirror her face kept its public composure, a smoothness Mara had long since learned to find suspicious. Bodies changed. Everyone's did, in the quiet places where no one was looking, a waist that descended through the seasons, shoulders that softened with age, a back that learned new angles from years of sitting. Official icons were not permitted to. The smoothness was the first thing that had ever struck her as wrong, and she had spent 10 years deciding it must be discipline. Mara unclipped the tape from her belt and let it fall against her thigh, a small private sound. "Shall we start with the shoulders? Where you like?" Her voice carried no performance in it at all, which was the second thing. In 10 years of fittings, Mara had never once heard Celine's voice do anything it did not have to do. Mara stepped behind her. The first pass was ritual, and rituals were how the room stayed bearable. Tape over the shoulder blades, drawing a level line across the top of the scapulae. Around the ribcage at the fullest point, held flat against the body but not tight, because a fitter who pulled too hard read compression marks instead of truth. At the waist, at its natural placement, not where a woman wanted it to be. Across the hips, front and back. Her hands moved in an order that had become indistinguishable from prayer, and the woman in front of her submitted to it without a sound. "Breathe normally," Mara said, because the breath had to be taken at its own time, or it was not a measurement of anything. "I am." Mara watched the line of her back through the mirror, watching the ribs. "No," she said quietly, "you're holding it." Celine exhaled, and the breath came out slower than a woman who believed she was breathing normally lets it come out. A held breath, released on command, with a small apology in it. The particular lag of someone who has been trained to hold her breath and must now remember, for an instant, how to forget. "That's the one," Mara said, and wrote nothing down yet. She was listening to it first. Breath was the one measurement no official record ever bothered with, and it had become, in her private work, the truest thing she knew. A body could be dressed, measured, photographed and corrected into anything the state required. Only the breath refused. She went around to the front of her and lifted the hem of the dress an inch at the waist, enough to see where the fabric lay against her body. Celine's hands rested on the edge of a dressing table, fingers still. The dress lay wrong on one side, not dramatically, not in any way a seamstress or a photographer would have noticed, but wrong the way a level is wrong, evenly. And Mara noticed that her left shoulder sat a few millimeters lower than her right, not enough for anyone else to see. Enough, perhaps, that a dress cut from last month's pattern would drag on one side by the time it was finished. Mara reached up and pressed, very lightly, a two-fingered level against Celine's collarbone. "Hold that." Celine held it. The shoulder rose a fraction, and the line of her neck changed, and Mara saw the difference, the way a surveyor sees a settlement in a war, not as damage, but as history. "Again?" Celine said after a moment. She had heard Mara take the measurement twice, and she knew what 2 takes meant in this trade. It meant the first number was a lie. "You changed," Mara said. In the mirror, Celine looked at her for a long time. "People do. Not like this," Mara said, and let the sentence sit between them while she walked the tape again over her shoulder blades and wrote a number that matched no pattern in the drawer behind her. She held the pencil still for a moment after the number was down. It was not in error. "Same time next week," Celine said, and her voice had taken back something of its public register without quite arriving there. "You'll cut the new dress from this?" "From this," Mara confirmed, and the word cost her nothing she could name. Celine turned from the mirror, gathered the grey dress around her with a motion that was practiced and slightly tied in equal measure, and let Mara unpin the last of her. At the door she paused once, one hand on the frame, and said, "Thank you," with a flatness that was almost Mara's own old courtesy, as if the room had passed its manner between them like a tool. Then she was gone into the corridor of pale stone, and the door closed and the room changed back. Mara stood where she had left her, looking at the place in front of the mirror where a body had been. She rolled the tape slowly, counted the rows of paper in the drawer behind her, the way other women might count their years, and understood that she would not sleep tonight. Pattern cabinet stood against the north wall of her workshop, a door of dark wood that had outlasted 3 governments. Inside, on brass rails, hung the 10-year record, bodices, skirts, sleeves, each pinned and labelled with date, occasion, and the measurements that made it. She had kept them herself since year 2, when a senior cutter's archive had been reorganised and never seen again. Paper did not flatter, she used to tell the apprentices. Paper remembered. She laid the afternoon's measurements on the rail beside 2016, then 2019, then 2023. The numbers spoke plainly. In 3 years, the waist had moved a full hand's width and returned, with no occasion on record. The shoulder slope had reversed. Where the 2016 bodice recorded a right side that sat 2 centimetres lower, the 2023 sheet showed the left. The hip line had widened and then narrowed on a curve no diet, illness, or surgery would carve. The cervical scar was gone from the sheet entirely. In its place, a new notation she had made at 4001, half whispered, as if the room might hear. Not a change within one body. Bodies change, she could read them, that was her life's work. Gravity, grief, age. What the sheet showed was a body being replaced between fittings, or never having been one at all. She stood back and looked at a decade of the most photographed woman in Vera, and for the first time in 10 years, the archive did not look like a record. It looked like a seam line, and at every point where the pattern shifted, something had been cut out. Ms. Bell. She did not turn at once. The voice came from the door, calm and official, a man in the grey of the protocol service. "Colonel Dren would like you to come up. A wardrobe matter." "Which one?" she said, still looking at the sheets. "There are 11 of them." He smiled with his mouth only, which she had learned was a rank. "You will know it when you see it. The wardrobe they brought in was not a wardrobe. It was a contingency. It arrived on Thursday by 2 trucks, the second of which had no markings at all, and whose driver looked at her once with an expression she would carry for a week, pity, or its professional cousin. Inside the building it was unpacked into the east annex and sealed with a lock that did not belong to her. The Colonel, Dren, came himself on the 3rd day. He was a tall man who spent his life standing at angles designed to make rooms seem smaller, and he had the habit of touching things as if checking their temperature. "Duplicate wardrobe," he said, by way of a whole explanation. "Official requirement. The First Lady's image must be reproducible at any hour." He let the sentence sit then. "Your workshop. Next to the original set." "Reproducible," Mara repeated, and heard her own voice do what it always did, measure the word before accepting it. "Reproducible," he confirmed, and his hand rested on a hanger as if the garment beneath were a patient. "The current body is a standard, Miss Bell. The pattern must be cut to it. That was the sentence she would turn over that night, and the one she could not let go of. A duplicate wardrobe cut to the current body was ordinary. Every state had them, and she had built one herself after a flood of 2018. But the pattern for it, Dren said, had already been drawn up in the capital, and she was to verify it. Verify. The word for what a checker does when the thing being checked is presumed guilty. She was given one afternoon, alone with the annex, no assistant. The garments hung in a row she had never seen before. A diplomatic coat, a garden dress, a morning suit that no one in the Republic had died worth wearing yet. And on the work table beneath them, a single pattern sheet. She took it up in both hands and read the numbers before she looked at the cloth. The waist was right for 2016. The shoulder line, left side 2 centimeters low, the exact slope her older sheets recorded, the one that had been reversed in 2019 and never returned. The hip curve from the first year of her service, before the widening, before the narrowing, before any of it. The cervical notch at 23 centimeters, not the 17 of this afternoon. She had spent 10 years cutting to a body that moved, aged, and breathed in front of her. And the state's own duplicate wardrobe was cut to a body that, by every line she could read, had stopped moving the moment she began. The sheet was not cut to Celine as Celine was now. It was cut to Celine as she had been, according to the archive, at the beginning. Mara set the sheet down on the table with a care that was not for the paper. And the new, official duplicate, the wardrobe built so that the image could survive any hour, was a reconstruction of an earlier body. A body that, if her archive meant anything, had existed before the woman she fitted every week. That evening she did not go home. She sat in the workshop with the light off and thought about what a duplicate wardrobe is for, and the answer arrived in pieces. A duplicate exists so that the original can fail without consequence, a fire, a death, a body that simply stops answering to its own name. She had built redundancy herself, once, a flood, a week of cancelled fittings, the relief in Celine's voice when the garden dress came back from the annex dry and whole. Relief, not gratitude. You do not thank a channel for its water, but redundancy is cut to the thing it must replace, and only to that thing. The pattern in the annex was not cut to what she had measured today, it was cut to what her own older sheet said she had once been. The state had not duplicated the current Celine. It had gone back to the first one and cut a second of her, which meant the current Celine was not being preserved at all. The current Celine was the spare that would be retired, and the earlier body, the low shoulder, the cervical scar, the waist a hand's width narrower, was what would be put back in service. Or was already, somewhere, still alive enough to dress again. She thought of the scar at 17 centimeters that she had felt today with her thumb fresh and shallow, a year old at most, and the scar at 23 that the pattern remembered. 2 necks in one life, and only one of them was the woman who had stood before her at 2015 with ink on her fingers and a half-finished sentence about the capital's reign. The archive, she understood now, had never lied to her. It had been telling the truth in 2 voices at once, and she had heard only one because for 10 years she had trusted the mirror. The mirror showed her a body every week. Paper, it turned out, was holding onto an older one. She did not sleep well that night, and what she could not stop doing was arithmetic, waist, hip, slope, and the numbers would not reconcile into a single life. A body can widen with a pregnancy it never announces, a shoulder can drop after an injury. What the numbers refused was the simpler story, and every morning she tried to make them accept it, and by Thursday they had not. On Friday she went home with nothing in her bag but the measuring tape, which was a departure. The tape had not left the workshop since year 1. In her flat, with the door locked and the lamp low, she laid out a hypothesis on the kitchen table, the way she laid patterns, the first body, 2016 through 2018, the low shoulder and its scar, a gap, unmeasured, where the archive showed nothing, because she had not been fitting anyone. She checked her own log and found it, a real gap of 4 months in 2019 that the office had called reorganization, and then, from late 2019 forward, second body wearing the same name, breathing differently, scarred differently, and she turned the thought over until it was smooth on every side, being measured by her without ever once being told what she was. The gap in 2019 was when the archive had first shifted. Not a change within one body, but a seam between 2 of them. On Monday, the colonel came again to collect the duplicate wardrobe, which was to be installed in a floor of the presidential residence that did not appear on any plan she had ever seen. He was courteous about it, and he watched her hands while he spoke, which told her the watchers had instructions. "Verification complete?" he asked at the door. "The pattern is sound," she said, which was true of the geometry and a lie about everything else. "Cut to the 2016 standard." "Yes," he said, and for a moment his face did something she would spend the week trying to name, something like a man confirming a door was locked, and something else like a man who already knew what it was for. That is all we needed. The trucks left on Tuesday morning, both of them, and the annex stood empty except for her 11 original wardrobes and the light coming through a window that looked out over the gardens where she had once, in another life, walked with her mother. She locked the annex door behind her and stood for a long moment in the corridor, listening to the building breathe around it. Then she went down the stairs without stopping and opened the front door of the pattern cabinet for the first time in 9 years. She had kept it shut, always, and left it open. Not wide. Not for anyone to see from the stair. The workshop was empty, and by evening it would be darker than a closed eye. She left it open the way you leave a window cracked in weather, not for air, but so that whatever was inside could finally be heard from the outside. She stood before the open cabinet with her hands at her sides and did not take the tape out of her bag. The cabinet stood open through the night. In the morning light it looked less like a secret than an accident. A door left off its latch and Mara closed it again before the cleaners came in with their carts and their small talk. What she had left open, she understood by the time the sun crossed the workroom window, was not a door at all. It was a hypothesis with hinges, that one of the bodies in her archive had not ended, but gone somewhere. The patterns did not die when a woman stopped wearing them, they waited. She had spent 9 years believing her archive was a record of one life told slowly, and now it sat in the open like a mouth. On Thursday, before the annex was quiet again, she took down the sheet from the wall and spread it on the cutting table. The crosses were still there, plotted by date over 10 years, shoulders, waist points, back lengths, hip lines. She had left the cabinet open because she could not stop looking at them from a distance, the way you stand outside a house to see its shape. Up close, the phases held their ground. Phase A, the first 3 years, a consistent woman with her own quiet habits of change, drifting in and out of centimeters the way anybody drifts. Then the break, a cluster of discontinuities inside 2 months, as if the body had been taken apart and reassembled by different hands. Phase B held for 3 years, stable enough to pass as the same woman living a changed life, then a sharper break still, and Phase C began, the current Celine, whose left shoulder sat lower than it had any right to, and who breathed in a shape no official record acknowledged. 3 bodies in 1 record. The arithmetic was not generous. If the archive spoke truth, the woman she had fitted in her first year and the woman she fitted every week were not the same body. She pinned the sheet back to the wall and did not take it down again for a week. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of night that ended in small humiliations. Celine came back from a diplomatic dinner at 10:30, and Mara was still in the fitting room with her lamp on low. She had been working late on the contingency patterns, the duplicate wardrobe, cut to the 2016 standard now that the trucks had taken it away, and she'd forgotten, or refused to remember, that there was a life outside, the annex. The door opened with a softness that was itself information. Protocol staff moved through this wing like weather, and Celine moved through it like a woman who had spent the evening being looked at. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and Mara saw the gown on her before she saw the woman. It had been beautiful at the ceremony, a deep blue thing that fell from one shoulder in long folds and was engineered to photograph as a single, continuous line of skin. Now it hung off Celine's frame like a coat left out in the rain, and she was holding it at her throat with one hand. Outside, through 2 corridors of locked doors, the din was still going. Mara could hear the muffled rise and fall of it past the wall, applause under a ceiling that swallowed sound. The state had sent its icon to be admired for 4 hours and was now returning it, whole, to the annex. "Take it off," Celine said, and did not smile at the command, because by now they had passed the point of smiling. Mara unfastened it at the back, where the seam lived, and worked the fastening down through a run of small hooks that had been placed to be invisible from every angle except the one a fitter stood at. The gown came away in one long piece of blue and left Celine standing in a structured underlayer, cream-coloured, holding her own shape. The first thing Mara saw was the back, bare from the neckline down to where the underlayer began, a long, smooth field of skin that ended in a line of compression marks at the waist, pale grooves pressed into her by an hour of standing in a dress that did not move, the way a document gets creased where it is folded and refolded. The second thing was the shoulders, bare above the underlayer's line, and the way her left one sat lower than it had that morning. The third was her feet, in slippers she had changed into the moment the door closed behind her, the red of them, rubbed raw by formal shoes, toes pointed slightly outward in the small permanent damage of a night's performance. Mara checked where the dress had injured her, because that was what she had been hired to do. Her hands were professional about it, one at the small of her back, pressing gently along the groove of a mark, the other at the shoulder, finding the point where fabric had set too tight against bone. She did it the way she always did, and for one instant she was only a fitter again, and the room was only a room. "Stop looking at me like evidence," Celine said, and her voice was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the dinner. "You hired me to look," Mara said, and did not move her hands. "At the dress." She let her hands stay where they were, on Celine's shoulder and the small of her back, but she stopped moving them, because that was what the distinction demanded. For 10 years she had looked at the dress, and through the dress at the body, and around the body to whatever fact was useful. She had never once been asked what she was looking at, and the question sat in the room between them like a pin waiting to be pulled. "Where did this come from?" she said at last, and her hand had not left Celine's back. Celine followed her eyes to the spot in question, a scar, new and still pink at its edges, sitting just below her shoulder blade where no dress would ever show it. Surgical scar, Mara thought, and then corrected herself. A scar of some kind, small and deliberate looking. It sat in the territory her archive had catalogued as scar-free for a decade, and it was not on any pattern. "Which answer do you need?" Celine said. Mara knew, at that moment, that she was asking the same question she'd been asking every week for 2 years, only louder. The official record said no surgery, no change, no discontinuity. The body in front of her said otherwise with every breath. "The true one," she said. Celine turned in front of the mirror, and they were very close. Close enough that Mara could see her own face in Celine's eyes, small and serious. Close enough to smell the dinner on her, wine, candle smoke, something floral from a coat worn over the gown. Celine looked at her for a long moment with an expression Mara could not read, because it was the first time she had seen one there at all. The mirrors held them both, doubled, and in the glass the distance between them was a little wider than it was in front of it. "You don't actually want the true one," Celine said, and kissed her. It was short. It was clear. It was deliberate in a way Mara would spend the rest of her life thinking about. Not an accident of tiredness, not a mistake of closeness. A decision, made and executed in the space of one held breath, with Mara's hands still on her back. When it ended, Celine stepped back to the dressing table and smoothed her underlayer with one hand, as if nothing had happened. The fitting continued. That was the part Mara could never quite explain to herself later, and the part that mattered most. They went back to work. The underlayer was checked at the waist, the shoulder line re-verified, a button replaced where it had worked loose. Celine stood still for the tape with her usual discipline, and Mara measured, and neither of them said a word about what had happened in the mirror. Everything was exactly as it had been, and nothing was. The official body was still being measured, the person inside it had touched her, and the tape went around both of them without distinguishing. When Celine left at 11, the room smelled of wine and candle smoke and skin. Mara stood in it a long time before she turned off the lamp, because the silence of it had changed. It was no longer the silence of a border crossed into private territory. It was the silence after someone has crossed it and not gone back. She measured her again the next week, because a fitter measures what has changed first, and something had. The tape went around the waist, across the hips, up into the inside leg, where it was closest to the truth of a body's posture. Mara measured the back last, standing behind Celine with her eyes on the mirror, and as she did, she became aware of a sound that was not in any record. Breathing. Not its rate, which Celine controlled for cameras the way other women control their voices. Its shape. The ribs opened unevenly now, a half-degree wider on the left side than the right, and the pause between breaths had lengthened. It was not a voice, but it was a signature, something no one else in the room could hear, and everything about her would eventually confirm. She wrote the numbers down in her private book, not the official one, and did not look up when Celine left. In that room, with no cameras and no protocol, the official body was still being measured, but the person inside it had touched her. Mara carried that distinction out of the room with her and did not set it down for a week. The body map took Mara most of the following month, and she built it in the hours between 6 and 9 in the morning when the complex was empty and the heating ticked its low sound on the quiet floor. She took every measurement from 10 years of private records and plotted them by date on a long sheet of paper pinned to the wall above her table: shoulders, waist points, back lengths, hip lines, each one a small cross on a line of time. The sheet was longer than the table, so she had to stand at its far edge and let it fall over her shoulder like a bolt of fabric. The crosses did not form the smooth drift of an aging body. They formed phases, and the breaks between them had dates on them, actual dates from actual fittings, and that was the part no one else would ever be able to argue with. A body can widen for a pregnancy it never announces. A shoulder can drop after an injury. The record files away. What these breaks were was that between one fitting and the next, sometimes a single week, the measurements had changed by amounts no single life produces in that time. The archive said 1 woman aging. The crosses said 3 women standing where the first had stood. She got access to the restricted medical dimensions on a Tuesday through a courtesy that was later explained away as a clerical kindness. The official measurements came back almost perfectly continuous with 5 years earlier. The same shoulders, the same waist, the same even breadth, smoothed across every date as if the body had been a painting kept in. Climate control. Mara read them twice before she understood, and then a third time to be certain of her own horror. The medical apparatus was not being deceived. A record this clean is never the product of error, because error is messy and lies are tidy. The record itself was being managed. Someone in this complex had been keeping Celine's body on file the way a museum keeps a painting, not as it was, but as it had always been. The error was not medical. The state maintained the fiction of one uninterrupted body, and it maintained it with care, because an icon that changed was a liability, and an icon that could not be trusted to stay the same was worse. The body she had measured through 3 phases, with its breaks and its new scars and its uneven breathing, existed in the world only as a rumor that her own paper archive was beginning to admit. Mara traced the contingency wardrobe for 6 weeks before it let her in on its destination. The duplicate garments had left her workroom in unmarked crates, and she followed the crates the only way a tailor can follow anything, by the thread. A glove lining, a shoe last, a bolt of the exact silk ordered for the second set, each one left her floor and moved through the complex on a route she mapped with the patience of a woman who had once spent 3 days, finding a single drop pin. She kept no file, she could not keep one. The route lived in the back of her head, a line drawn on the dark wall above her table, and every week it grew longer. The route left the city at last, on a vehicle she was never allowed to see from inside, and ended at an estate outside the capital that did not appear on any map she was permitted to read. A medical estate, she gathered from the guards' rotations and the smell of it, antiseptic under the cold air, a building with too many white rooms and too few windows. The crates had gone in twice since the trucks left, which meant whatever lived there was being dressed, and what is dressed is expected to appear. She went in on the first day it was permitted to her, which was itself a kind of permission she did not want. The colonel who had collected the wardrobe met her at the gate with 2 officers and a sentence that did its work before it was finished. A courtesy, he said, watching her hands while he spoke, the way watchers were instructed to watch. The First Lady's condition is stable. The estate would like its tailor to verify the fittings. He said it the way a customs officer says the word in part 1 of her life, as if the garment were suspect. The corridor took her past rooms she would never be allowed to enter, and at the end of it, a door was opened by a woman in a white coat who looked at Mara with an expression she would later recognize as professional. Pity, the look one gives a technician who has been allowed to see the machine. The room was small and bright, in the way medical rooms are bright when they mean to be kind. A bed with its head raised against the wall, a window with blinds that were always half down, a chair by the bed that was not empty, and on it Celine Var. Not the Celine of the mirrors, not the one whose shoulders sat low, and who breathed unevenly and who had kissed her in a fitting room. This Celine was thinner than Mara remembered from the archive's first years, and weaker in a way that had nothing to do with measurement. Her hands were loose at her sides, the hands of a body that had been asked for, less and less over time. Her face was close enough to the public figure to pass at a distance, which was the whole of what the public ever had. Her body did not follow. It lay in the bed like a garment that has been worn too long and now only hung by its CMs. "Mrs. Bell," the woman in the white coat said, and her voice had the careful flatness of a protocol. "You're expected." Celine turned toward her, and the effort of it cost something. Mara saw it in the way her gaze arrived a half-beat late. "You've let your hair go," Celine said, and smiled at her with a mouth that had forgotten the choreography. "Yes," Mara said. The word came out before she had decided it, and it was true, and for one moment the room held only that small domestic fact. Then the bed's rails caught her eye, and the chair by it, and the way the woman in the white coat stood at a distance that was not affection, but policy. "How long?" Mara said, and heard the question land wrong in her own mouth, too big for the room, too small for what she meant. The woman in the white coat answered, "Because no one had given Celine that trouble. You will find the fittings need nothing but a hem. The rest is managed here." Mara measured what she was permitted to measure, standing at the foot of the bed with her tape against the air. The numbers she took were almost, and that was its own kind of proof. They sat close to the oldest sheets in her archive, within a centimetre here and there of Phase A, the first Celine, the one from her earliest years, whose shoulder had sat high and whose breathing she could no longer quite remember. The contingency wardrobe was cut for this body, or a body like it. Whoever wore the duplicates next would carry the dimensions of Phase A into every room, and the public would see a first lady who had simply stayed herself through the years. "Mrs. Bell," Celine's voice, again, when Mara had not heard it come. The gaze was on her now, steady, and something in its steadiness had been kept alive by will alone. "You built the second wardrobe!" "I cut it," Mara said, and let the distinction stand. "The pattern was given to me." "Yes." Celine looked past her at the window with its half-down blinds. "And you have found what it is for?" It was not a question, and the room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when they have heard everything they were going to hear. Mara stood at the foot of the bed with her tape in her hand and understood that the second body had not been created to replace Celine. It was being kept here, in a white room, alive and diminished, while the woman the public had been watching for years was already somewhere else, standing in front of a mirror with a new scar and an even breath, wearing the name like it had grown on her. The original had been absent for a long time. The state was not preparing to swap her out, it had already swapped her in, and the only question left, Mara would later find she could not ask it aloud, because no one in that room had the right to hear, was who? The woman in the white coat left them to it, and Celine watched Mara cross the room with an expression that was not the public one. In 10 years, no one had ever watched her cross a room without an expression that was public. She noticed the difference in her own spine where it carried herself, a half-inch looser at the top, as if someone had let down a stay that no one on duty was supposed to touch. "Sit," Celine said, and it came out without ceremony for the first time in 10 years. Mara sat on the edge of the chair beside the bed, and Celine began to tell her. She told it the way stage people tell stories, because Mara would learn that was exactly what she had been, in scenes with entrances and exits, though the stage here was a small white room. Her hands stayed folded on the blanket while she spoke, which was itself information, a body that had been taught to narrate without gesticulating. Her health had broken during a diplomatic crisis, the worst of the administration's first years. A degenerative condition, she said, and then added, with a small, tired laugh, that the name of it did not matter. What mattered was that her body had stopped being available to the state at precisely the moment it needed a first lady most, and that the machinery does not stop for one body. The crisis was over in a month, she said. The machinery it started was not. She stood in, Celine said, and named her. Not a title, not the office, a name. And Mara heard it land in the room before she could pass what she had heard. For a few events, a signing, a dinner, the autumn ceremony, I agreed to it. I thought it would protect both of us. You saw how the press covered that year? Nothing was noticed. And I thought, she paused, and her loose hand turned over on the blanket as if to weigh the word. I thought it would give me a winter of quiet. No cameras, no ceremonial body. For the first time in my life, illness allowed privacy. Privacy, Mara said. You had to be ill to get it. Yes. Celine did not smile. That was the arithmetic of it. The state would never have rested a first lady on purpose, so I had to break first with the machinery to let me down. And then, Mara said. And then the machinery discovered that continuity mattered more than authenticity, Celine said, and her voice did not waver on it because she had been saying it to herself for years. They found that the public did not notice. They found she was easier to manage than I was, and more reliable and better at the part. Temporary substitution became institution. And when I tried to come back, she said, and here at last the public composure cracked, just a little. The system no longer needed me. The role had outgrown its performer. Mara let the room go quiet for a while after that. The heating ticked against the white walls, and through one thin door she could hear once the distant flat music of a corridor, someone walking with purpose, then gone. Why didn't you stop it? Because stopping it meant admitting what I'd allowed, Celine said, and by then Celine Varr was no longer a person. It was an office, occupied by flesh. It was, Mara thought, the most political sentence a First Lady had ever spoken in a white room. The state had not merely replaced a woman, it had discovered that identity can survive independently of the body. If the clothing, the hair, the gestures, the official files, the medical records, and the public choreography all remain continuous, then the role continues. The name does not need its owner to keep being real. It needs only witnesses, and the state is very good at keeping witnesses. Mara thought of her own work in those terms and felt the floor tilt under it. Every fitting she'd ever done was a witness act, the state's version of continuity, verified by her hands against a body. She'd been keeping witnesses for the machinery all along and calling it craft. One more thing, Celine said, before Mara could take her leave. She had been watching the door. The woman who stands in for me now is not a woman they made. They did not build her, they found her, and she was already fluent in what the part asks. You will understand who I mean before you meet her, because she is the one you have been fitting. Mara looked at her. You're telling me my measurements are a stranger's. I'm telling you they are a woman's, Celine said, and that the name above them has been wrong for years. The rest of it is yours to verify, fitter. You always did know a body better than its file. She learned Elena's name, the way one learns a seam allowance, by the edge of everything else. The white-coated woman called her by it once in a hallway, and Mara heard it the way she heard a change in breathing, as fact arriving before interpretation. Elena Voss, 39, 4 years younger than Celine had been when the substitution began. A stage actress before this, a woman who had spent her life understanding entrances and gestures, breath before an audience, the slow act of inhabiting a role until the costume stopped feeling like a costume. Mara had known all of those things in Celine's body for years and called them discipline. She had never once thought to call them craft. The white-coated woman said it the way a nurse says a diagnosis at the end of a report, flat, finished, nothing left to add. Then she went on about vitals and diet and the estate schedule, and Mara stood in the hallway with a name she could not yet use. In the corridor behind her, 2 secretaries were filing papers into a cabinet, and one of them glanced up, and for half a second the whole machinery looked at her, the people who kept witnesses. She went back to her own papers before that glance became anything. That evening, in the Chancellery's private wing, a junior aide left a folder on her workbench without a word, the estate's correspondence file, or something dressed to look like it, letters from Celine Varr, dated over 4 years, signed in a hand that was steadier than any First Lady's had ever been on record. Mara opened it once in the lamplight and read 2 letters to their end. Both were addressed to the estate's director. Neither said what a First Lady writes when she is no longer a First Lady. They were about weather and a cat and the price of certain vegetables. The state had not even bothered to make her sound like herself anymore. It had only needed the signature to keep arriving. The reconstruction took Mara a night, and she did it sitting on the floor of her workroom with the lamp off, by memory alone, because some records are safer unrecorded. The woman whose waist she had adjusted for 10 years, Elena. Whose injuries she had remembered, catalogued in the private book with dates and causes, Elena. Whose fabric allergy she had learned, whose mood she had read through posture, whose held breath she had mistaken for composure, Elena. Not Celine. The name was counterfeit. The body Mara had loved was not. She sat with that for a long time in the dark and found it did not feel like betrayal. That was the strange part, the part that would have cost her sleep if she had allowed it to. She had not loved a face, or a name, or a body. She had loved the specific facts of it, the low shoulder and the uneven breath, and the way her ribs opened a half-degree wider on one side, and those facts had been real. They belonged to Elena. The state had spent a decade dressing one woman in another's name, and the hands that knew the truth of it had been Mara's. In the morning she pinned nothing up, wrote down nothing, and went to work with both hands empty. The fitting room, late in the evening, after the complex had gone quiet on its floors, Mara was alone with her work and her lamp when the door opened, and it was Celine who came in, the public one, the current one. Elena in a grey dress that hung from her shoulders, standing in the centre of the room with her hands on the edge of the dressing table. The dress was wrong for her tonight. Mara saw it the way she always saw it, as a small structural argument. The shoulders were being carried by the sleeve instead of the body. The woman inside was tired, and a tired body tells you so before it says anything. Raise your arms, Mara said, because it was what one did when a dress needed taking off, and the room had not yet been told anything. Elena raised her arms, and Mara began with what was always begun, the gown off at its back seam. The underlayer checked where it held her shape. The ritual was a country of its own, and they both lived in it, and for the first few minutes nothing in the room said otherwise. Then Mara put her hand flat on Elena's shoulder blade, where the new scar sat just below it, and said, "What is your name?" Elena went still. The tape was in Mara's other hand, half extended around the rib cage, and she did not pull it. The stillness lasted 3 breaths. Mara counted them the way one counts a pulse, because a body that stops moving is telling you something. "Before the dress comes off," Mara said, "I would like to know which body it belongs to." "Before the dress comes off," Elena said, "I would like to know what you already know." "Both then," Mara said. "In order, though." "The dress, first!" The underlayer came away next, and Elena stood in a simple shirt of her own, the cream color of it doing nothing to disguise what was under it. Mara worked at the front closure, and as each layer left her body she spoke, because the room was quiet enough to hold it, and because a stage actress had decided, at last, that the audience of one deserved the whole. Part. "Her name is Celine Var," Elena said, and Mara's hands did not stop. They were already moving down the line of her shoulder toward the sleeve, professional and unhurried. "She is alive. She's in a medical estate outside the city, and she has been there for longer than you have worked for this woman." The shirt came off over her head, and Elena's shoulders were bare in the lamplight. "I was on a stage when they found me. I did the part for 3 events, and then it became more. Then nearly everything." "The winter of quiet," Mara said, without looking up from the last button. "She meant you." "She meant herself," Elena said, and her voice was level. "And I was the instrument she used. Then I became the whole mechanism." The shirt fell to the floor of the fitting room, and Elena stood in nothing but her own skin, bare from shoulder to waist, back and chest both open to the small warm dark of it. Mara stood a step away from her with one hand still raised, and for the first time in 10 years there was no garment between them. "You are not Celine," Mara said, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to. "I was hired as a stand-in," Elena said, and turned slowly, because an actress knows what a turn costs in front of a mirror. The original consented to the beginning of it, and then disappeared into an illness that gave her privacy. "The state discovered what I've been trying to tell you for a year. The public does not need the woman. It needs the continuity." "For one winter," Mara said, "it was supposed to be a re-sesh, not a succession." "Rest is what it started as," Elena said. "What it became, the state preferred." She let her hands come down to her sides and did not cross them. A woman who has been photographed in 10,000 postures knows that even arms crossed is a statement. "The first time I felt it lock in was the spring address. I walked to the podium as a stand-in, and by the second sentence, I was the First Lady." "The machinery doesn't switch you on and off, fitter. It just keeps running." Mara closed the distance in 2 steps, and when she reached her, she did what a fitter does, because it was the only grammar the room still had. Her hand went up along the line of Elena's back, and this time it was not checking a seam. It read her, the low shoulder, the uneven ribs, the scar below it, the small architecture of a body that had been performing another woman's silhouette for a decade, and was beginning, in the quiet of this room, to forget which one it had been. Elena took her hand and turned it, deliberately, the way one turns a dial to find a station. Fingers spread along the blade of her shoulder, and then down, the hand moving where the tape had been. "Measure me," Elena said. "Not her!" The tape came out of the room's drawer, and Mara held it for a moment without moving. In 10 years she had measured this body in every state of dress and undress, and the tape had never once been a question. Now it was. "Elena," she said, and the name sat in the small room like a key being tried. "Your name is Elena." Elena's hands were still where Mara had left them, on the edge of her own shoulder. She let go slowly and turned fully to face her, so that the lamp caught both of them at last. "Yes," she said. "It is." She paused, and when she spoke again the voice had changed. Register, lower, unmarked by any podium. "You may use it as often or as little as you like." Mara looked at her for a long moment, and what moved through her was not the clean shock she had expected. It was something older than that, and it took her a while to name it. Betrayal, yes, the archive holding Elena's 10 years as if they were Celine's, 1,000 small numbers of her own life misfiled under another woman. But beneath the betrayal, something quieter, and it was recognition. 10 years of fittings had made this body a country she knew as well as her own hands. The name on it had changed, and the country underneath had not. Who else knows? She asked, and her voice was the professional one again, the one that had gotten them both this far. How many people in that complex know your name? Fewer than you would think, Elena said. And more than the public does, which is what matters to them. She smiled, and it was a small, tired smile, nothing like the public one. The complex knows you measure her. The estate knows she is there. And in between, a few people know that the two are not the same woman, and they have been very careful about it. The tape, Mara said. The measurements you give them, each season, the official ones. Those are? Mine, Elena said. My body, in their numbers. She lifted one shoulder a fraction of an inch and let it settle back to its low line. They have been buying my continuity for 10 years fitter. And tonight you stopped the meter. Mara put the tape down on the dressing table, flat and closed. I stopped it, she said, because the numbers were no longer hers. No, Elena agreed. They're mine now. They always were, and the state just didn't know it yet. She crossed the room to Mara, and this time it was not the crossing of a public figure. It was a woman walking across 10 feet of fitting room because she had just said the truest thing in her life and wanted to be closer to the only person who had heard it. Her hand came up to Mara's face, and her fingers were warm and steady where they had been shaking against the table a minute before. Kiss me, Elena said, and her voice was level in the way of a woman who has spent 10 years being spoken for, as myself. Mara kissed her back, and the room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. There were no cameras here, and no audience, and the only witness was a lamp on its stand. Elena's hands were at her collar and then gone, and Mara's were in the dark of her hair. Their mouths met with none of the choreography. A public kiss carried, and the difference was so complete that Mara felt it in her teeth. This was a private language being spoken for the first time by two people who had only ever met across a garment. They moved together in the small room, and the lamp went out of it at last when one of them, Mara could not say which, and in the dark, neither needed to know, let it. The wall was warm where a hand rested on it, and then there were hands everywhere, and none of them professional. Mara knew that body in every state she had ever catalogued, and now, undressed on both sides of the dark, she knew it in the only state that had never been recorded, unperformed. The low shoulder was there, the uneven ribs were there, the scar below the blade, but none of them meant anything now except that they were hers. Elena's breath came unsteady, and Mara held her while it steadied, one hand flat on the small of her back. When it evened out, she felt Elena's mouth move against her temple, close enough to feel the words without hearing them. There, Elena said at last, when the lamp came back on by itself and they were both in it again. That was me. Mara looked at her, at the woman she had been measuring for a decade, now lying in the lamplight with her hair on the floor of the fitting room, and understood what she was looking at. Not a replacement. Not an asset. A person, 10 years into another woman's silhouette, in the middle of forgetting which one she had been. Your name is Elena, Mara said again, and this time it was not a question at all. Yes, Elena said. It is. She sat up and let the lamplight find her, and Mara noticed, because she always noticed, it was what she did with the body in front of her, that the scar below Elena's shoulder blade had not been there 2 years ago. You're looking at me the way you used to look at her, Elena said, and there was no complaint in it. As a pattern. No, Mara said, and the word cost her something. I'm looking at you as a person. Elena studied her for a moment in the mirror, and then she smiled, small, unmarked by any podium. Good, she said, because the state is about to find out. Measure me, she said, not her. After, they lay in the small, warm dark of the room with the lamp off. The silence that followed was not empty. It had a texture to it, like the pressed cloth of an unworn dress. Mara lay on her side with Elena's head against her chest, and she could feel the woman's breath even out under her hand, that particular uneven rhythm, the low shoulder, the scar below it. All of the facts she had been reading for 10 years were now, in this dark, simply a person. Elena came out of the dark and into the room. She moved differently when she was not performing, smaller, more careful with her weight. Her left shoulder still sat low. It always would, she had said once offhandedly, the way a person mentions an old fracture. Mara watched her dress in silence. Shirt first, then trousers, then the grey dress that had hung from her shoulders an hour ago. The ritual ran itself. A fitter's hands know the order of things, even when her mind has moved on to other countries. When Elena was dressed, she stood at the edge of the dressing table and waited. Mala took the tape from where it lay on the table, flat, closed, a small rolled thing like a sleeping animal. She had put it there an hour ago with the intention of never using it again on this body, and now here was Elena asking for exactly that. The tape did not know it yet. She measured her, shoulders, ribs, waist, hips, the numbers running through her hands and stopping at the edge of them. Nothing went onto paper. The tape came off, was wound back up and put away in its drawer with a click that sealed the room. No record, Mara said to the silence of it. Nothing reproducible. Good, Elena said. She was already moving toward the door and paused with her hand on it. The state will come for one eventually, a remeasurement, official. When they feel the continuity slipping. She turned back to her in the lamplight, and her face had the level look of a woman who has been saying the same thing to different audiences for years. When they do, you will have a choice. I know, Mara said. You'll take the one that isn't theirs, Elena said, and it was not a question. Mara stood in the small room with her hands at her sides, both of them empty, and understood that this was what the state had not known it was building. A fitter who could read a body perfectly and choose, at last, not. Write it down. The lamp hummed in its stand. Outside the fitting room, the complex had gone quiet on all of its floors, and the two women in it were already, each of them, a secret to the other. Mara had made her choice at the moment she set the tape down. Private truth over official identity. What they had built between them was explicit, and it was reciprocal. The only question now was how long the state would let it stay private. She went back to the estate on a morning with no sun, and Celine was sitting up in her bed when the white-coated woman let her in. The room had been rearranged since last time. There was a chair by the window now, and Celine sat in it with her hands wrapped around a cup that was not warm. Sit, Celine said, and the word had its old flat courtesy back on it, because privacy, she would explain, has a way of becoming confinement. You look like someone who has been measuring things for a while. Mara sat, and Celine told her what she'd already been telling the machinery of the state for years, that the substitution began with consent, and that it had ended there. The machinery had not wanted to hear an ending. It had wanted a standard, and it had found one that performed better than the original, and so the original had been kept alive in a white room while her name went on walking. It started as relief, Celine said, and her voice was quiet, but it did not waver. Do you know what 10 years of a ceremonial body costs? Every hour of it was watched, Mara. Cameras, security, the choreography of my own breathing. When I broke, for the first time in a decade, no one was looking at me, and my illness gave me something I had never owned. Privacy. She turned the cup in her hands, and then the privacy became a wall. When I tried to come back, the system no longer needed me. Celine Var had become a role independent of its original performer, and I was simply the first body it had been written for. Are you afraid of her? Mara asked, and the question cost something to ask because it was not a professional one. Celine looked at her for a long time with those slow, tired eyes. I am afraid of what she will become when I die, she said at last, and did not elaborate. She did not need to. The third woman was a pattern. That was how Mara found her, the way she had found everything in this life, on paper first and in flesh only later. She was standing at her table with the contingency wardrobe's measurements spread before her, trying to understand what the state was actually building when she saw it. The duplicate set had been amended again since her last crate. The new measurements did not match Elena either. They matched nothing in the archive at all, except that they were cut to fit a body that would, with care and discipline and the machinery's patience, be made to match. Someone else was being fitted for the part. A third woman, younger than either of them, whose shoulders were still settling and whose records the state was already beginning to write. A medical file with almost perfect continuity because the apparatus had learned its lesson. Elena was aging. Her shoulder had changed again since the last fitting, and her scars were accumulating, and her emotional control was failing in ways the communication staff had started to document. She was becoming physically incompatible with the official archive, and the archive does not retire its icons. Mara sat back from her table and understood, with the same cold pleasure she had felt over a warehouse phrase, that the contingency wardrobe was not for Celine. It never had been. The state was preparing to replace the double, exactly as it would have replaced anything else that stopped performing. Elena's fear was not of Celine returning. It was of disappearing the way Celine had disappeared. A medical estate, no public name, no witnesses. And then Celine Varr would go on, smiling on television in another body, and no one would ever have to explain what any of it had been. She told Elena that night, in the fitting room, with the door closed and no one on the floor. Elena listened to it standing in front of the mirror with her arms at her sides, and when Mara finished, she did not cry. She had been an actress for too long to waste the one scene that mattered on tears. "So, I am next," she said, and her voice was level in a way that frightened Mara more than any crack would have. The role outgrew its performer twice. "The first time it was consent," Mara said. "This time it will be a war you never see coming." "Then we are the same," Elena said, and smiled at herself in the glass with an expression Mara had never seen on a public face, tired, unperformed, entirely hers. "We are both bodies this state has decided to manage." What Mara held in her workroom by then was a library. 10 years of paper patterns, the early Celine Rose, her own clean hand on the seams, the break years, phase C, the current woman's measurements in their careful wrongness, the contingency set cut to a body that had existed before and was now being rebuilt from memory, and the newest ones, the third woman's, measurements not yet a body but a promise of one, with the state's own continuity already written into their margins. Fitting notes beside them. Private books, body histories with dates and causes, the small catalogue of scars and injuries that no official record had ever admitted. Together they could prove the substitution in a way that would have ended it. A court, a press, a public record that could not be managed away. And the same archive in other hands was technology of replication. A pattern is a body reduced to something reproducible. Give it to the state and it becomes a template. And a template grows as many bodies as you cut from it. The document that could expose the machine was also the machine's own manual, and Mara understood at last why no one had stopped any of it. Everyone in this complex who could have read her workroom was also someone the state had measured. She would decide what to do with it in a few days' time, when the last of it had been gathered and there was no more left to find. For now she pinned everything to the walls of her workroom and looked at it for a long time in the lamplight. 10 years of bodies, on paper. Celine Varr died on a Tuesday in the grey season, and it was quiet, because that is how the state preferred its endings. Mara learned of it from the white-coated woman who stood in her doorway that morning with the careful flatness of a protocol delivering weather. No official announcement would be made, there was none to make, because the public Celine had never technically been in this estate and would not be missing from any record. A body dies, the machinery noted, and an office does not. That same afternoon, on a screen in the communications floor that Mara was not supposed to be reading but had been allowed since the last fitting, a small unmonitored corner of Celine Varr appeared. She was at a Cultural Foundation dinner, the one she'd been expected to chair for years, and she smiled her public smile at a row of cameras and walked the length of a red carpet with her arms moving in their choreographed way, and spoke and was photographed and was Celine Varr from every angle the state had approved. Mara watched the screen with her back to the door, and behind her, in a white room outside the city that no one was allowed to enter, the woman who had been Celine Varr before all of it lay in a bed with its head raised, against the wall, and was no longer going to get out of it. The real woman was dead. The identity remained alive, and the state had already filed the paperwork for it. Elena's records would be adjusted, her biography left untouched. The substitution declared ended because there was no longer an original to protect. From the state's perspective, the problem had resolved itself, the way all its problems did, by becoming standard. From Elena's perspective, her erasure had become permanent. She saw the dinner on a screen in her own room that evening, and afterwards stood at a mirror for a long time with the light off, learning how to live inside an office that had outlived its body. 2 days later, she came to the workroom with a face she had already made up her mind on. "I will not be measured again," Elena said, and there was no request in it. Not by them, not for the record. "Whatever you keep of me, let it stay where no one can cut from it." Mara looked at her for a long moment and then nodded once, the only ceremony she allowed herself. "Then it stays with me," she said. and nothing I write goes on paper the state can read. The order for the final remeasurement came on a Wednesday, in handwriting Mara had never seen used by anyone in this complex before. Complete, official, remeasurement of the First Lady, it said, effective at once, prior to permanent record adjustment. The room was the same room, the pale stone corridor beyond it, the hushed voices, and inside, the mirrors, the fabric on its rails, the measuring tape in her hand. Same room, same mirrors, same tape. But everything in it meant something different now. And Mara stood in the doorway of it for a moment before she let herself go in, because she understood that this was the last time any of it would happen. Security came with her this time, 2 officers who stood by the door with their faces doing the flat thing they did. Mara looked at them both and said, "Out." They waited for a second of something more formal than that. "The measurement is official," one of them said. "The room isn't," Mara said, and the door closed behind them on its own weight, and the room changed in its old way. No cameras, no protocol, only mirrors and fabric and the low tick of a heating system, no one else in. The complex was ever allowed to hear. Elena stood in the center of it in a grey dress, and for the first time since the substitution began, she wore her public clothes with no performance in them at all. She removed them herself, that time, the dress off over her head, the underlayer after it, each layer coming away without a hand to help, because Mara had decided she would not be the one to take them off. She stood before the mirror in nothing and looked at her own back through the glass with an expression Mara had come to know as unperformed. "What do the records say?" Elena asked, and her voice was level in a way that cost something. Mara stood behind her with the tape hanging from one hand and said, "I don't care." She began as if following procedure, because the room still had its grammar and she would not be the first to break it. Shoulders, the tape across the top of the scapulae, level line, written down. Bust at its fullest point. Waist at its natural placement. Hips, front and back. The back length from nape to waist, up into the inside leg where a body's posture tells its truest story. Her pen moved through it all, and the numbers came out of her hand in their old careful script. Then, at the hips, she stopped writing. The tape was still around her body. Elena held it in place with one hand, the way she had always done when a measurement needed holding. The pen hovered over the book and came down again, but it wrote nothing. Elena noticed, because she had spent 10 years noticing what Mara's hands were doing before her eyes did. "Aren't you recording it?" "No." The refusal sat in the room like a pin pulled. For 10 years, measurement had been what this trade did with the body. It turned flesh into a reproducible document, and the document was what made the body official. A number that could be written down was a number the state could own. Pattern cut from it could grow as many bodies as you liked. Every measurement Mara had ever taken was, in the end, a copy. And every copy was a chain. She took the tape off Elena's hips and let it fall against her own thigh, that small private sound, and put the book down on the dressing table. "From here," she said, "it's just you." Elena stood in the mirror, undressed and unrecorded, and watched Mara set the instrument down. In 10 years of fitting, she had never once seen it put away mid-measurement, and the silence of that was worth more than any number. A body without a record is a body that cannot be reproduced. Mara had just made Elena, for the first time in her life, unrepeatable. Then she did the last thing a fitter does when there is nothing left to measure. She took off her gloves. The workroom habit of it, the thin cotton things she wore because protocol said skin should not touch fabric in a public building, she peeled them off one finger at a time and let them fall on the dressing table beside the tape. And then, with her bare hand, she touched Elena's back. Her fingers found the old scar she had known for years, the one that had come in the early years, thin and deliberate, looking, sitting where no dress would ever show it, a scar the archive had catalogued as absent for a decade and that no pattern had ever been cut around. She traced it once, with the pad of her thumb, slow enough to be a reading and close enough to be a kiss, and then she leaned forward and kissed it. The gesture cost nothing in the grammar of couture. That was exactly its point. A pattern can reproduce a body's dimensions to the millimetre, but it cannot grow this line, or know how it aches when the weather turns, or what it felt like to receive the cut that made it. This body's history could not be reproduced by a template, and Mara had just said so with her mouth against Elena's skin. Elena was crying then, quietly, the way she cried now that no one was filming her, without ceremony. Mara stayed where she was, one hand on the scar and one on the small of her back, holding her while the room went quiet around them. She gathered it all that night, in the dark of her workroom with the lamp off and a single match. The patterns first, the early Celine Rose, her own clean hand on the seams from a decade ago. The break years, with their impossible discontinuities, Faye sees figures in their deliberate wrongness. Then the contingency set, a body that had existed before, now being rebuilt from memory. And the newest ones, measurements not yet a body but a promise of one, with continuity already written into their margins. She laid them all on the table in rows. By date, the way she had once laid out a decade of bodies to read them against each other. The match went into the center of it, and the paper caught with a slow orange that spread through the rows like heat moving along a seam. It was not dramatic. That is how she would remember it. And the remembering is what mattered. Paper warping first, then blackening at its edges, lines disappearing as they went, the shoulder lines going soft and curving away from each other, the waist points dissolving into their own ash. The little notches she had cut to mark dates curled and fell away, and with them the architecture of 10 years. The bodies that had been reduced to measurement ceased, one row at a time, to be reproducible. The third woman's patterns burned last of all, and the promise in their margins went with them into the dark. Mara stood at her table until it was done, and did not feel what she had expected to feel, relief or triumph or the clean satisfaction of a job finished. What she felt was smaller than that and larger, the weight of being the only witness left to a decade, with nothing in her hands but ash and a memory. She had not destroyed evidence, exactly. The state would write its own files again, as it always did. She had destroyed something harder to rebuild, the technical original. Without the archive, there was no longer a template against which any body could be compared, authenticated, or replaced. Authenticity had been the state's deepest instrument of control, the quiet premise that it could decide which body counted by comparing flesh to paper. She had taken the instrument away. Not to protect Elena, though that would follow. Not to destroy a case, though that was true too. She refused the premise itself, that a state may decide which body is real by measuring it against its own drawings. From now on, there would be only the living bodies and their history and no one else's pen. Elena was in the workroom when she came out of it, standing by the door with her arms at her sides. She had come down to watch the last of it burn, and she watched from there with her unperformed face, and when the table was ash, she said, "What happens when they ask for the original pattern?" Mara looked at her. The lamp was off. The only light in the room came from the window, grey and honest. "There isn't one," she said. "Then what am I?" Elena asked, and her voice had gone small on it in a way that would have been unprofessional anywhere else. Mara looked at her for a long time, at the low shoulder and the scar and the body that had spent 10 years standing in for another name, and said, "From now on, this body is the original." The ceremony was in the Cultural Foundation's Great Hall, on a morning of good light and full houses. Celine Var appeared in it the way she had always appeared, first a presence, then a silhouette, then a face, arriving at the cameras in stages with her arms moving in their choreographed way. The public saw continuity, and the public always does. That is what it buys with its looking. Mara watched from a distance, in the last row of the hall where no one had ever once thought to look for a tailor. The dress was the last garment Mara had made, and it was not grey this time. It was a deep blue that fell from one shoulder in long folds, the same line as the gown of the old years. But it had not been cut from Celine's historical measurements, or from the state archive, or from any replacement template. It had been cut from Elena's present body, her low shoulder, the uneven opening of her ribs, the waist at its true placement. Every allowance in it was a fact she had known with her hands, and the state's own pattern room would have called it wrong. It fit her. That was the whole of what mattered, and the public never knew it. For one evening, a state costume had secretly acknowledged its private body. The dress hung correctly on the television screens and in every photograph, because it was true, and truth, Mara had learned at last, is the only fabric that does not need correcting. As Celine Var took her place at the head of the table, she looked, once, toward the last row. No gesture, no public signal. Just a glance that crossed a full hall of cameras and landed, for one unrecorded instant, on the woman who had measured her. Mara did not wave. She looked at the dress, and she saw it hang correctly, the shoulder level where it needed to be, the line of the waist sitting at its true placement, the folds falling where her body allowed them, and nowhere else. That was their private language, and it was enough. The garment acknowledged the body. And in a state that had spent a decade deciding what shape its people were permitted to have, that was the last word either of them had left to say, and it said nothing at all.